All right, I think we're just going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the third webinar that I'm offering this month during Child Life Month. This one is talking to children about loss. If you are interested in the other previous ones, they are recorded on my, the recordings are on my website at practicalparentingsolutions.com. And the first one was promoting positive experiences at the doctor and dentist, and the second one was Reiki for you and your family. So if you're interested in listening to those, they are on my website, as this one will also have a recording that I usually get posted up either later today or sometime tomorrow that will be posted. All right, so talking to children about loss. Let's see here. All right, so for those of you who have attended my other presentations, I apologize. You'll have to bear through my, my introduction of myself. So about me, I am Genevieve Lowry. I am a certified child life specialist. I am also certified in infant massage. I am a Reiki master and teach Reiki classes all the way up to master level. I am trained in guided imagery, and I'm a private practitioner working predominantly with children and families affected by illness, loss, or other types of, I've also worked with families with other types of sort of trauma or crisis or that require some sort of expressive arts, opportunities for play, developmental explanation, or some kind of preparation for some change or event that's been in their life. I'm also a consultant. I have consulted with a variety of nonprofit organizations on family day events, on group work. I also offer curriculum for schools, coming in and doing a presentation on positive hand hygiene, good hand hygiene called Germ Busters, or going to the doctor and dentist. I'm an online educator. I have my own online learning platform that provides opportunities for professional development units. They are typically in a course format of either 2 or 3 weeks long that also include webinars, live webinars, and that's what creates eligibility for the professional development unit. I am adjunct faculty at Bank Street College. I teach both in the Child Life program as well as I teach child development in their general ed and special education program. I am an author. I am author of the book, Following Imagination, Activities That Move, Create, and Play with Guided Imagery, available in Amazon and on Kindle. And I am also I've lectured both nationally and locally. All right then. That is me. My contact information, if you guys should have questions after this or questions about, some of the other things that I'm involved with, you can reach me at my email, which is practicalparentingsolutions@gmail.com, as well as you can go to my website, Practical Parenting Solutions, or the Convenient Classroom if you're interested in professional development units or how those courses work or what is being offered there. We just completed a sibling course, and there's an upcoming course on, if I can remember the title, it's working with children during abuse evaluation, and the role of the child life specialist in that seems to be a very popular and interesting topic. My DIYchildlife.wordpress.com is really just my website that I do for fun. It is, it has videos of me creating and making teaching dolls or teaching tools for either various procedures that are done for children, issues that arise, as well as some normalizing activities. Leah Wilson. Someone needs to turn off their audio on their phone or mute their phone or just listen through. You should be able, if you're on a computer, be able to listen on the computer if you just hit listen only. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a story, and this is the story of my dog Hudson. Hudson was a dog that he's a little tiny Yorkshire Terrier. He was about 7 or 8 pounds. I lived in New York City for quite a number of years in a very tiny studio apartment, so I had a tiny dog to fit that studio. This dog was with me long before I got married and had children, so this dog was absolutely my dog. He had typical little dog personality. He would not let anyone else walk him. No one else could feed him. Only I could. He was, if I was around, he would settle for others if I wasn't there. But he very reluctantly. So this was definitely my dog. So when my children were born, he was considerably much older at that time. He wasn't really a dog at that point anymore that played with you. He used to fetch and catch a frisbee in his younger years, in his prime. By the time we moved out to New Jersey and I had children, he was, an old man and really just hobbled around. He was somewhat arthritic, losing his sight, suffering from some infections and things that took us back and forth to the vet a number of times. So when his time came for me to really think about and decide about his quality of life, I really had to think about not only how I was going to experience this, but also my children. Now, my children at the time were about 3.5 and maybe 6 or 7, my daughter was, and my son was about 3.5, maybe close to 4. So I sat them down and I talked to them a little bit about what would happen and how it happened and what they would see, and that we were going to go to the vet and what a vet was. And they'd been to the vet many times, actually, at this point with me and the dog. So they were well prepared. I used some books, and we talked about what would happen, that the doctor would give a medicine that would make the dog sleep, and then they would give another medicine. The first medicine would make the dog sleepy and comfortable and not feel any pain, and the second medicine is the medicine that would stop the dog's heart, and that is without your heart beating, but blood can't pump around the body. If the blood's not moving on the body, then the organs inside don't work. If your organs aren't working, then you are dead. And when you're dead, you can't feel anything, you won't remember anything, you can't talk, he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't play anymore, he wouldn't bark. So we reiterated this many times, and then we went to the vet, and this sort of played itself out. And at one point, I allowed the children to come and go from the space as they pleased. I didn't want them to feel like they were sort of trapped in there and that they couldn't escape. My husband was also with me, so they came in and out of the room, and at one point, when the vet was, she first gave the first medicine, and we all watched her do that, and that made him comfortable. And that was when we sort of all said our goodbyes, and we talked a little bit about it. And then when she administered the second medicine, the kids actually weren't in the room when she gave it, and interestingly enough, she started to panic when my son walked in the room, to the point where I had to put my hand on hers and say, "It's really okay, they're going to be just fine." And which I thought was funny that I was comforting her. But when my son walked in the room and he saw what she was doing, he looked at her and he looked at me and he said, "That's the medicine that stops the dog's heart and makes it so he's dead, right?" And I said, "Yes, that's the medicine that makes him dead." Now, so at that point, we stayed a little bit longer. We said our final goodbyes. I had, my breakdown, and then we were leaving. And as we're leaving, my son turns to me and says, now he's 3.5, and he turns to me and says, "So when are we coming back to get him?" And this is very typical. It took every morning for a couple of weeks. He got in my bed, and the dog did sleep in my bed. I hate to admit it, but he did. And every morning he got in my bed and was like, "Oh, Hudson's not here. He used to sleep here in the bed. Remember when he slept here in the bed? When are we going back to go get him?" And this went on for many weeks, and every morning I reiterated the same thing. The dog, we took the dog to the vet gave him medicine, his body stopped working, he's dead. He can't feel, he can't hear, we went through the whole thing again. I would say maybe almost 4 or 6 weeks later, out of nowhere, I was doing the dishes, and my son walked up to me and looked at me and said, "So we took Hudson to the vet." So one time we took Hudson to the vet, he got medicine and he got better, we brought him home. I said, yep. And then he said, the next time we took him to the vet, he got medicine and he's dead. And I said, yes. And that was the end of that. And that's sort of how long it kind of took him to sort of begin to grasp sort of the permanence of this. Now, my daughter, who was a little older, was a little bit more verbal about her thoughts and feelings. And although this wasn't a dog that was cuddly with them, he was a presence in their life. And she recognized that and talked about sort of the absence of that feeling and that sort of something, it always sort of felt like something was missing in the house for a while. So I tell you this story primarily because it sort of highlights some of the things that I'm going to be talking about throughout this discussion. And it also, it really is, it truly points to the way that children think about and experience different losses. So types of loss that children experience throughout their lives, and loss does not only mean that I used the word loss specifically because there are losses in our lives that happen. That doesn't mean someone has died or something has died. That it means that something's lost. And that those losses can help us bridge the gap from something maybe smaller or less intense to these sort of more intense kinds of losses that are much more close to the heart, so to speak, and that create a greater impact. But it is these smaller losses that help us prepare and help us gain insight into how your child or how a child or how you yourself will manage and deal with, for lack of a better term, a greater loss. So a loose tooth can be a big deal to some kids. It's a major milestone. For some kids, this is like ridiculously exciting. And for other kids, it can actually be a little scary to lose a tooth. They don't actually always understand. And if no one sort of explained that that was going to happen, then that becomes kind of a little bit of kind of a scary thing that could possibly happen. So that's one example. The loss of security items, a blanket, a stuffed toy. When do you give them up? Or losing your favorite teddy bear? The story of Mo Willems has the book Nuffle Bunny, which is about how the father takes the baby to the laundromat, and he leaves Nuffle Bunny, which is a stuffed rabbit, I think, at the laundromat. And children lose these things all the time, and that's heartbreaking to some kids. From a child life perspective, for those of you who are child life specialists, that there's also the idea of when a child has had a medical device for an extended period of time, a G-tube, a FortiCath, a Broviac, that there's a certain element of loss when those things are removed also. And obviously the more obvious losses of extremities and things like that or hair loss due to cancer treatment or trauma. Those are not the losses that I'm going to be covering mostly today, but I do think that a lot of what I'm talking about will apply in how you talk to and prepare children for those. But today's discussion is really about talking to one's own children about loss and applying that mostly to sort of these everyday kinds of losses, and then applying those theories to a significant loss from death. So there can also be loss of a home if someone loses that to foreclosure or bankruptcy or fire or some type of trauma, or even just a move. Your mom or dad gets a job someplace else and children have to move. That's a great loss as well. Loss of a job can also create some stress in a family, and children will be impacted and feel that kind of change or stress because it may alter and change how their family dynamics are and what they can and cannot have and what they're accustomed to having. And then loss of family members. So loss is a part of life. So when you're talking about loss, it's important to bring up for children throughout their daily lives, to observe the obvious, I call this, that loss is a part of life, that things have a lifespan, and within that lifespan you get born, you grow, and you die. Interestingly enough, when I was looking for an image for this slide, it was really hard to find a slide that had death as part of it. It sort of always went right into the cycle again, so which makes sense for what they're trying to say. But it was interesting to me that as a society, once again, we really like to sort of negate that death actually happens. So when you talk about different losses that children are encountering throughout their daily lives, you set the stage or you lay a foundation by discussing loss that occurs in plants. When you plant a garden, you put the seeds, it grows to a sprout, it grows, it bears fruit, or it blossoms and blooms, and then that plant dies. And, you can even go one step further if you, compost or use those plants as fertilizer, that those things then go back to the earth, and it's also a recycling project. Insects. Kids step on insects all the time. We see dead worms after a rainstorm on the sidewalk. We see dead insects all the time. You kill a bug. And that gives you the opportunity to also talk about how something is no longer living and what no longer living means, and to use language like death and dead. Roadkill, as funny as that, sort of putting that on the slide was to me, to sort of say that for lack of a better terminology. Roadkill provides us with the opportunity also to talk about death in a non-threatening, non-crisis time where you see a dead animal on the side of the road, and it gives you the opportunity to sort of talk about not only can death happen from internal factors of old age or illness, but can also occur as a result of external factors due to trauma or accidents, and things like that, that these are the things that kind of can lead to a death. Fairy tales are another great way to talk about death and loss. Often in fairy tales, a parent is either already died, which puts the child in a certain circumstance, or someone has to die in order for something else to happen. So it gives you the opportunity to sort of talk about what that means, or how that happens, or that it's just something that is, and all these things are things that are familiar instances to children. These are things that in a non-threatening, non-crisis time, you can begin conversations that lay the foundation for, and that set the stage for, a loss that is going to be a greater loss in the life of a child. I often think about, for my children, when our dog passed away. Now, I am a child life specialist, so I talked about death a lot, and certainly it was not something that was taboo in our house to talk about. Our children have two grandparents. My husband's father has passed away, and that is a loss that we talk about, although my children never knew him. My husband's mother remarried many, many years later, and that man my children did know, and he recently passed away. So I feel like, the dog dying also set the stage for this bigger loss. And then even other adults or other people in their life who they're even closer to, each one hopefully sort of sets the stage for the other. But sometimes it doesn't happen in that sort of sequential order of smaller to bigger to, something much more impactful for kids. But if you have had these types of conversations, you have the opportunity at least to develop a language that children can understand, and to have set the stage to be able to bridge a gap between something that is a regular occurrence, like seeing roadkill or plants dying, leading to then something that's not such a regular occurrence, say a grandparent or a loved one. So concepts in understanding death. So universality is that all things eventually die. It's an understanding that eventually everything dies. So when a child says to you, is so-and-so going to die? Your answer is, well, everything dies. Irreversibility. Once something has died, it cannot come alive again. Now, this is the stage that my son had not quite grasped yet. So he still believed in the possibility that Hudson was, that we were going to go back and get him, that it wasn't permanent. Nonfunctionality. Once something has died, all aspects of living cease to function. So this is understanding that when a death has occurred, someone doesn't feel, doesn't sleep, doesn't laugh, doesn't cry, doesn't, that they don't think anymore. They're not who they were anymore. Causality includes both abstract and realistic causes of death or from internal and external factors, sort of what we were talking about before, that the understanding that things can be caused from illness or old age and things just sort of wear and tear on the body leading to a natural cause of death, or it can also be a result of something external, an accident or trauma. So your developmental perspective, your preschool-age children often and typically believe that death is reversible. And due to their egocentrism and in the pre-operational stage, they also believe they can cause it or they can change it. So these are kids who, need to be very clearly reiterated that you didn't cause, this is no one's fault. If you don't know why something happened, I don't know why this occurred. If you do know why, there's typically you can often offer up a scientific explanation. Grandpa's heart stopped working. Grandpa was very old, and when you get old, it's like, when you have a toy that's old, the batteries wear out, and that's what really happened to Grandpa. And sort of talking along those kinds of lines of that it's not the child's fault or responsibility that this happened, but that these are the factors that led to that loss. School-age children question if a person can eat or feel, sleep, or is scared. They're much more concrete in their sort of beliefs about wanting to know. They might say things like, if Grandma's up in heaven, why did we bury her in the ground? So in sort of not understanding sort of ritual and religious beliefs or whatever a family believes, giving children the opportunity to be really clear and straightforward in your language to explain exactly this is what happened in the body. This is what they can no longer experience X, Y, and Z. Middle childhood and adolescence understand that death is permanent and that there are factors both internal and external that can cause it. I would say that across the board, I would make it very clear, regardless of age, that the child is not to blame for what has happened, that they could not control that. I think that there are many instances where, especially in time of crisis, that sometimes our minds wrap around a certain idea, and no matter what developmental age we're at, we can sort of lose ourselves in that, and so that there are just certain misconceptions that should be automatically cleared up, and I think that blame and fault is one of them. So why do we talk about loss? Why even bring this up? If no one's dying right now, why should we even talk about it? Excuse me. Well, various experiences in our life lead to growth. So we have all kinds of challenges and all kinds of crises that we experience, and that from each one of those we either face them and grow and learn and develop from them, or we retreat and sort of fall back, and that can lead to other issues. So by shielding your child from potentially upsetting information, we keep them and ourselves from growing together. That an illness, a loss, all these things can support a child's growth and development. And those start with those very early losses that I talked about at the beginning. The loss of a tooth, the loss of your favorite stuffed animal, the loss of a pet. That from those losses, or from those changes and transitions in life that naturally sort of happen and occur as part of our life, that the way that we talk about them, the way that we approach them, helps to develop the language and the tools that children need to then be able to apply that to for lack of better terminology, a greater loss. So by using language that is familiar from those previous losses, helps the child bridge the understanding from the loss of a pet to the loss of a grandparent or parent. So some things that are sort of tips, I guess, for, lack of better terminology. Be honest. I think this is fairly obvious, and I'm certain that it is pretty obvious to most people, especially the childlike people that are out there listening. Tell children the truth. Use simple terms that are clear, factual, and familiar. No euphemisms. They're confusing and can lead to issues with trust. I will tell you, though, when we needed to put the dog down, my son kept saying to me, "He's dead," right? That makes him dead. And I had to use words like dead. I wanted so badly to grasp on to these euphemisms, to say, oh, he's going to doggy heaven, he's where he'll run free. Because for me, as the person who also loved and cared about this dog, it was so hard to say those words because they were so permanent to me. So I understand why any parent would want to not only sort of put up that sort of barrier for themselves to the reality, as well as the belief that that is protecting their child somehow. I understood it so clearly and so personally in those moments that I really, understood why parents and why many people, not just parents, but many of us choose to use, quote unquote, sort of softer language as opposed to really saying, these are the facts. The heart has stopped. When the heart stops, the body can't pump blood. When the body doesn't pump blood anymore, the rest of the other organs in the body can't work. When they don't work, you die. And when you are dead, you don't think, you can't feel, you don't laugh, you don't talk, you don't breathe, and going into this sort of reiteration of things. But you'll hear me repeat like a million times already as well throughout this. But that, because it's in the repetition of it that also helps children really grasp the language and what's happening. Identify feelings. These are 3 books that I use fairly often in helping children identify their feelings, especially young children and even some school-age children, that it's important that we that we help them to identify their feelings that they're feeling. Are they feeling angry? Are they feeling sad? Are they feeling frustrated? Are they feeling a combination of things? Often many children will also feel sad at the loss of a parent or a grandparent, but also kind of excited because they're going to see all their cousins that they haven't seen in a long time. So there's this sort of mixed emotion that children often experience as well. So the Feelings book is a very basic. I would use it with very much younger children. The Feelings book by Todd Parr, it has great facial expressions. He's a great preschool age author. He writes because everything is very simplistic and very easy, and it helps you as a facilitator, whether you're the parent or working with a child, to also be able to tweak the book and highlight what you want to do, because there's not a ton of text with the story as well. So it gives you the opportunity to create dialogue and discussion. The Way I Feel, I believe, is by Janine or Jan and Kane. This one's sort of a little bit goofier and quirkier, but also a good book that sort of helps to identify feelings, similar to I Feel Silly by Jamie Lee Curtis, I think it's called, which is also one of my favorites. Visiting Feelings is more about how do we experience feelings in our body, where do we hold them, how do they feel, and allowing yourself, this one's probably more for the school-age child, allowing yourself to experience those feelings and then to understand how to manage them. And also to be aware of signs of stress. So if you're the professional, to either help, or if you're the parent, to look for signs of stress. So signs of stress would be things like increased separation anxiety, a child withdrawing, or eating, maybe not following their typical routines might be also. Separation anxiety, regression would also be increased anger, and giving children outlets for those providing children outlets for those feelings as well. Giving children the opportunity to process. So allowing children the opportunity to process. Children process in much smaller chunks than adults do. So they will experience something in a small amount. They will be sad for a short period, then move on to something else, then come back to it, then move on to something else, then come back to it. In some respects, it's a considerably healthier way to process something extreme, because it gives your body and your mind and your heart the opportunity to sort of adapt and take in that information, manage it, and deal with it in smaller amounts than to be constantly sad or constantly upset all the time. So in asking open-ended questions of children rather than yes and no questions, asks them to elaborate on their feelings about what's happening. And asking them, do you understand? What do you think happened? That gives them the opportunity to verbalize, so that you, either as the parent or as the professional, is able to then facilitate a conversation or clear misconceptions. I would say with older children, utilizing various types of ways to communicate. Sometimes teenagers do not want to talk face-to-face about it. So either emailing them just to check in, texting them, or, leaving a voicemail on their phone or a note in their bag or something may give them the opportunity to just let them know that that you're thinking about them and that you value what they're feeling and experiencing, and validating those feelings as well. Relate recent loss to previous experience. So by relating it back by reminding children of what they have experienced before. Remember when we had our garden and the garden grew, and we planted the seeds and the flowers grew or the vegetables grew, and afterwards the plant died. Sort of being able to bring back those images and bring back that language will help to provide you as the facilitator or the adult with a familiar experience that they've already mastered, and utilize those skills in a new experience, so that you are taking something that they've already gained control of, that they've already overcome, a new concept, and applying it to a different circumstance, and then recognizing that they do have the skills to master this also. So let kids play it out, giving children the opportunity to play out what they're experiencing. So providing children the opportunity to have little people to do that with, do it with their stuffed animals. If it was there's a medical reason someone passed away, giving them the opportunity to play with the medical equipment if they were part of that process or whatever. Sort of helping children find ways to play out that loss, and that gives them the tools that they need to be able to also master it. And through that, either as a facilitator or the parent, you will have a better understanding about what their understanding, what their learning has been, what their misconceptions are, and then coming back to that. I think during the play you have to sort of let them do that, just let them sort of play, and then you can come back to clear misconceptions. Or you don't necessarily want to interject, but to find a way, either through responsive answers and responsive questioning, to find a way to help kids understand what's occurring and clear up those misconceptions. You want to create a safe space for expression. You want to make sure that children have a place that they can go to that is either a quiet space where they can think or write or draw, or a place that is a safe space where they can punch something, a pillow, or scream into a pillow, providing them with a place to be able to feel safe to express those feelings. I can't say enough about validating children's feelings also, that by validating children's feelings gives them the opportunity to, gives you the opportunity as the parent or the facilitator to help kids know that any feeling you have about this is okay. That it's okay to feel all the different things that you are feeling. Reading books, and I do provide 2 or 3 on one of the slides. But books is another, it's a familiar thing that children respond to and that they know and that they understand. And it gives the parent the opportunity to sit close with their child, to reconnect with their child, to let them know, or whoever the caregiver is, I should say, in case it is the parent that has passed away, that it provides an opportunity for caregivers to express their love and concern and care for this child, which will help to build attachments and bonding with the caregiver also, and help the child to understand that that person is there for them and is there for them to help them move forward through this crisis. So you want to prepare also. We want to prepare for what is happening. If they are involved in the dying process, you want to prepare children for what they're going to see, what, not just the equipment if the person is in the home passing away or if the person is in the hospital at end of life, that you also want to talk about what happens to the person physically, that their breathing becomes labored, they may have changes in their color of skin, may be grayer, that they may be gasping. It's harder for them to talk. And then providing them with roles and jobs that they can do. You know, your mom loves it when you read stories to her. Why don't you read your favorite story or a story that you guys read together, and giving them that sort of job and role and responsibility. So preparing children for what is happening throughout the process of something. If it is a trauma or a traumatic event and it's still within a hospital setting, then preparing the child also for what they're going to see when they encounter what that person looks like, what equipment is attached with what also they may encounter on the way into that room, if it's in an ICU setting, in an open format, or into a patient room or whatever. And then prepare for what comes next. You want to prepare for what comes next, the funeral, the wake, a vet's office. Certainly when my children went to the vet's office with me, I had actually talked to the vet prior to this happening, when I talked to the vet about end-of-life care for my dog. What happens? What do they do? And then what happens after? What happens, what would be the steps of that? And that's how I knew that there was 2 injections, that there was the first injection that just had the dog with really pain medication, so the dog would go fall asleep essentially and then not feel and be comfortable, and then the second one, which was the agent that euthanized the dog. So I knew that there was a 2-step process. I also knew that we would be in a room by ourselves and that my children could come and go. So I knew that it was okay to say certain things that aligned with the philosophy of the vet's office also. Things like funerals as well. You want to, is it open casket, closed casket, awake? Will there be people crying, but there'll also be people laughing because people will be telling stories. There might be pictures of this person when they were younger or older. So who's going to be there and what happens? Will there be a prayer? Is it a religious? What the rituals are for these types of events. And prepare for feelings. You want children to be prepared for all the feelings that they're going to be having, and for those mixed, especially the mixed ones, because I think that is what's most confusing to children, that they want to be they're happy that they're seeing people that they hadn't seen in a long time, but they're also sad that this person has passed away. So preparing, allowing for, and giving permission, which I believe leads me to my next slide on give permission. Yep. Whoops, not what I meant to do. Okay, so give permission to have all kinds of feelings, and to allow children the opportunity to feel both sad and happy. I forget, I once did I was doing a project with a child, this was years ago, this is a total aside. I was doing a project with a child a long time ago, and and we were writing. It was one of those big giant floor puzzles, but it was blank, and we were writing down different feelings on the puzzle. I forget what the premise was, why we were doing that. But one of the feelings that a child wrote down was sad, happy. And I said, sad, happy? He said, yeah, when you feel both sad and happy. And I thought, you know what? That actually happens quite a bit. And now I actually use that feeling to describe certain times in our lives where we are both sad and happy. I tell my kids, you're sad that you're going back to school, but you're really happy you're going to see your friends, or you're upset that you're going back to school, then it becomes upset, happy. But, so it's that combination of feelings that you experience that are sometimes opposite of each other, and yet you're having them at the same time. And I think that's very confusing to most people, especially to young children who are having a hard time just identifying feelings to begin with. So giving permission to have those feelings and identifying them, and then give permission to continue to live life and enjoy it. It's okay to go to your best friend's birthday party. It's okay to have a good time while you're there. They don't have to sit and hole up in their room. And I think especially for older children, it is equally important to allow them the opportunities to step away from it. It gives them the time to, I don't want to use the word forget, but to sort of, or the word denial, but it does give you the opportunity to sort of step back and kind of really do forget, so that for a few minutes or a few hours while you're with your friends hanging out, so that you are, it gives your body an opportunity, a reprieve from it all, so to speak, so that giving permission to continue to live their lives and enjoy them. So some resources, predominantly for younger children, is Lifetimes. This is the book that I used with my children, A Beautiful Way to Explain Death to Children. I actually think it's just a beautiful way to explain the life cycle, and I don't think it's something that should only be reserved for when someone dies. I think that it talks about things that happen naturally in our lives, and if we use it, it should just be on a kid's bookshelf, because I think that way it opens up the door for conversations when we're not in crisis, when we're not in a challenged mode, when a parent doesn't have to explain the loss of their own beloved person in their life and be strong for their own child and be struggling at that point to try and figure out how do I explain this to my child, when possibly this book's already sitting on your shelf, you've had that opportunity, you can just go right back to it and you're going back to a familiar space. The Invisible String, love this book. And it's mostly meant to be a book about separation anxiety, but what is death but a never-ending separation, really? And she does bring up the idea of someone dying, but it's done in such a way, along with so many other things in relation to separation, that it just normalizes the whole experience. And it's a beautifully well-written book. When Dinosaurs Die, A Guide to Understanding Death. This one I like this one because it really does, it goes into like every single possible scenario. And so you can pick and choose from it the sections that apply to a specific circumstance, and not necessarily reading the whole entire book. It's very well done in child-friendly language. These are some resources. FredRogers.org, which just as an FYI, Friday, March 20th is Mr. Rogers' birthday, so everybody should be pulling out their cardigan sweaters in honor of that. That's actually a real thing. FredRogers.org, this is a great website, obviously, because it's Mr. Rogers, but it also goes into some very basic understanding about how children perceive and understand loss and death and their world. Kids Health is another one, as well as babycenter.com, and this one's really just related to preschoolers. And so, if anybody has some questions, you can type them into the chat, and I will try to do my best to answer them. I'll give people a few minutes because it takes some time, I'm sure, to, oops, I don't want that. Whoops. Too thorough. Just as an FYI, next week is the last webinar that I'm doing, Wednesday, March 25th from 1 to 2, and that one is on guided imagery, and it is called Create, Play, and Move. Activities that support guided imagery or something along those lines. All right. My daughter's 3.5, almost 4 years, always asks, but where is she now? But where did he go? I know you talked about going into the earth, but she's so literal, I'm afraid she thinks she's playing on people. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yes. Cindy, you're right, and I often think about this stuff too. Like even in our effort to be very factual and going into this, that you're playing on people. I think you can talk about if someone is buried in a cemetery, you don't normally go there to play. So I guess you could say that they're buried in a cemetery, but you'll also point out that they don't feel. So even if you are playing on them, this person isn't experiencing that, and that's okay. So that, I talk about also, I worked with a little boy who's 3.5, and the mother didn't want, their belief, which made it kind of hard because she didn't have necessarily a religious belief about, like she didn't want me to mention heaven, which was fine. So we talked very concretely about where, when Daddy died, his heart stopped working, and this very same typical type of question kept coming up, like, so where is he? Where did he go? And actually, he finally came up with his own explanation about that he was in outer space, which I could actually tie into like the stardust and everything. And because it came from the child, it wasn't really quite a analogy that I would necessarily use, but I felt like it was something that was comforting to him, and he generated it. And although I, still made clear that this person, this father was dead, it sort of more along the lines of we still carry these memories in our hearts, kind of thing. But I agree. I don't know that there's anything wrong with saying to her that, you're not really playing on someone because the person is dead and they don't feel anything, but it's okay that you are playing there. Like, I don't know that there's any, like, why would that be? I think it might just be your own interpretation of her thinking that she's playing on top of a dead person, whereas if you explain when someone's dead, they don't feel anything, they don't see anything, they don't know that that's happening, yada, 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 and we typically bury people in a specific area where typically you don't go and play, but even if you did, that would actually be okay. The person's not feeling it. So I'm thinking if you sort of go back to even your own concept of that she's so literal that if you explain that when someone's dead they don't feel anything, that then it would be okay to play on them because they don't feel anything or they're not experiencing that anyway. I hope that answered your question. Susan, yes, I will be providing PDUs. If you joined us late, I asked that people put CCLS, just type in CCLS so that I know that you are a certified child life specialist. I think you've been to some of my other ones also, so I would assume that you should have. I think you attended one of my other ones, and I might have sent you a letter already for those, and then I will send you one for these new ones as well. You can see some latecomers now putting CCLS, of which both of you I know are CCLSs. That's okay. All right, are there any other questions? Oops. Oops. I should just put it on the picture of the dog. It's so adorable. Oh. Oh, wait, I'm missing half of your question, Amy. So Amy asked, how would you, oh, well, I don't know. How would you approach a situation where culture and religion may be confusing for explaining death? For example, I worked with a family who wanted to explain that after death, you'll see mommy again. That's a very common religious belief. That's in, Christianity and Catholicism, that when we get to heaven, we meet these people again. I think what gets confusing is is that idea that we put somebody in the ground if the person's been buried or cremated or whatever, that then they, then we go to, then we go to heaven afterwards. So, or something along those lines. I think that it's confusing, but I think if you explain each step, and depending on the age of the child, will determine how they really process that. So a school-age child, you go through the whole thing of this person has died, and then you can even say there are some beliefs, or your family believes that after someone dies, their spirit, which is what I'm assuming they're talking about, that their spirit goes to heaven or along those lines, and then you will see that person again. And you'll see the person when eventually, that means that they're also explaining, as they must say to this kid, that they're going to die eventually also, and when they die at their very old age, or whatever you want to reiterate some of that, when their time comes. And that can all be worked into sort of life cycles of things, that they will reunite, that some beliefs are, that you reunite with your loved ones in heaven, or you reunite with them. It is confusing, there's no doubt, but I think if you take it chunk by chunk or piece by piece, that you can do that. I think I told my children that we keep Hudson in our hearts. Hudson is now in our heart and in our minds, that we remember him and we continue to love him, and that's how we stay connected to that spirit of the dog, is sort of how I explained it. I think it's almost impossible to stay away from some of these euphemisms for things, and really just because we don't know the answer to them. But it is confusing, but I think if you take it one piece at a time and one step at a time, so if you explain sort of the life cycle of something, and then how someone has passed away and died, and then what the rituals are for that, and then you go into the belief of it. And if that brings comfort to those parents in that family, it's highly possible that will also bring comfort to that child, because it's probably also something that she's been exposed to, forever. If that's a part of their culture and belief system, she's probably always felt that way. As a child life specialist, I worked pediatric oncology for, 20 years or something. So, I talk about death a lot, and, so my kids sort of have this understanding of death and loss, and, and sometimes I'll say things, that imply that there's, that spirits are still with me. Some of these patients or kids or whatever, and I make jokes about, when Long Island Medium's on, like, that Long Island Medium never met me on the street, she'd be like barraged by I don't know how many spirits that are surrounding me. But having known so many children, but it's just part of our daily conversation. So I think if that is something that's part of their conversation and part of their home and part of their belief and ritual and cultural beliefs and religious beliefs, that it may not be as scary. That we have to be careful also that we're not imparting our own bias and our own thoughts and over-applying the rules almost, I guess, is a way to sort of look at it. I hope that answered your question, as confusing as that answer was. All right. I guess I answered it long before I finished my thoughts. All right, great. All right, so are there any more? Are there any more questions? Certainly if people come up with questions or comments or thoughts afterwards, feel free to email them. Although I've been doing this work a long time, I certainly don't have all the answers, and I think what's hard about a webinar this way, it's sometimes hard to to have a dialogue about things, and I think that certainly much more is learned by a communication that is, you know, back and forth rather than just listening to me spout stuff. But I also hope that this has been informative for you all, at least a starting point to sort of think about ways to integrate and talk about and support families who are, who are recognizing that loss is a part of our lives, or who are facing a loss at the time that you're working with them, and that you can apply many of these concepts to a lot of the different types of losses that as child life specialists we experience in the hospital, though that may be a whole nother webinar. So if there are not more questions, I will thank you all for coming, and this will be posted, the recording will be posted to my website at practicalparentingsolutions.com within the next probably day or so. And if you have not registered for next week's, feel free to register for next week's webinar. There's still a couple of spots left, although that one seems to be very popular. I hope I can live up to that expectation. And if there's no questions at the moment, then I will end this recording.